Matthew was the first guy who said, I want to play Cole. And he's who I wanted to play Cole. And then he asked us if we'd ever thought about Woody Harrelson. And we said, yeah. Could you help us with that maybe? I was just churning them out, and I would finish an episode and drink a bottle of whiskey to reset my brain. And then 2 days later, I'd start the next episode. Nothing has meaning to a nihilist. For Cole, the whole world seems overwrought with meaning. I actually have another story for Cole and Hart that, who knows, maybe we'll do it one day, that if it hadn't been for him, there would be no True Detective.
First of all, this is my voice. I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. But this podcast isn't about ALS. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me. I'm a father of 5, married for over 35 years, a New York Times best-selling author, an NFL first-round pick, and a practicing attorney. This is Nothing Left Unsaid, where my son Troy and I sit down with extraordinary people for raw, honest conversations about life, its toughest trials, and greatest triumphs. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Nic Pizzolatto, you're an incredible writer, and not just because of your record-breaking hit, True Detective, which you wrote, produced, and even directed 2 episodes of. You burst onto the literary scene with a collection of award-winning short stories Between Here and the Yellow Sea, followed by your acclaimed novel, Galveston. Then you made a bold pivot into television and film, and absolutely crushed it. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you knocked it out of the park again by marrying the beautiful and talented Suzanne Santo, who we had the pleasure of talking to back on episode 56. Nic, welcome to the podcast. It's truly an honor to have you with us.
Thank you. That's the most flattering introduction I've ever received. And it's a real honor to talk to you, Tim. I really admire you and what I know about your journey. So thank you. It's funny that you mentioned Suzanne. She's a Pizzolatto, but with everything I've done, I consider my relationship with Suzanne the triumph of my life and the redemptive act of my life.
I read that as a child. You were a bit of a loner. Why is that? You've described your hometown as a mixture of Blade Runner and the woods where the Transformers live. How did growing up in that kind of place shape the way you see the world and eventually the way you write?
Well, the place I grew up was just a place, but it as a landscape, it was very dramatic. It's a very polluted place. It's a refinery town near the Gulf of Mexico, and it's all bottomland. It's all very flat, and it was one of those places in South Louisiana, like we put on screen in True Detective season 1, where it always felt like nature was just an inch away from taking everything back. The kudzu and the trees and the vegetation, it's like the fecundity of it is almost obscene sometimes. And landscapes always captured my imagination. It's always spoken to me, and I feel it's a character in the world and in the stories I tell. But that was the place I spent my formative years, and I was alone a lot. Without going into too much detail, I had a very unhappy home life, and a lot of things that shouldn't have happened to me as a kid, and was pretty socially unadjusted, and spent a lot of time alone in a room drawing. That was what I did to bide the time and make myself feel safe. And a lot of the process of my life the last 5 years has somewhat involved untangling a lot of that, and the habituations and adaptations that I sort of ran on for the first half of my life. But I guess you know, it influenced me as a storyteller, perhaps just in my my view of the certain places in the world, and um, and really when you get to season one of True Detective, or even Galveston, my novel, it gave me a sense of place which was commensurate with my spirit's desire for expression. Um, and I saw it as a dangerous place. I knew it as a volatile place, and a violent place. And I always had a sense of God and of some kind of providence within the world, but I also had this other sense that there's something carnivorous in the world, that there is something very hungry, that wants to make a meal out of you. Uh, and I guess those two things side by side, and trying to reconcile them, informed, I guess, my vision, or my early visions, as much as possible.
Was there a specific moment, book, or person that shifted your life's direction from blue collar Louisiana to the world of literature and philosophy?
Yeah, it was in high school. Uh, I got a visual arts scholarship to Louisiana State University, and there were no plans for me to go to college, really, in my family. And that just got me 2 hours away from home and into a major state university. Now it's just Louisiana State, but this is pre-internet. This is 1993. I graduated high school, and I remember the first time I walked into the LSU library, because this is back when you needed libraries to get knowledge, and just seeing all the books there had this great effect on me of, oh, here I can learn everything I need to know. I can find everything I need to know here somewhere. And then thus began my real self-education, or the first half of it. But I was always much more of a visual artist, and I was captivated by movies and television. But where I come from, there was no real mechanism to get from where I was socioeconomically and geographically into the film and television business. And even if I had announced something like that, where I'm from, that would have been saying, like, I want to be the first astronaut on Pluto, and everyone would just say, "Good luck." Uh, and in college, I became very disillusioned with the visual, mostly with the visual arts culture, and what I saw as a manufactured value, and a lack of standards, and my interests were always pointed towards beauty and truth in some way, and I didn't see much of that. And I was always really poor, and it was very expensive to try to be a visual artist and take these classes and all the supplies you had to buy. And I knew I should be an artist of some kind. And I was also really discovering great literature and philosophy. And I realized a lot of my visual arts seemed to have some kind of narrative context to them, where they implied something before and something after. And I thought about, well, which of the arts is the cheapest to practice? And it was writing, obviously, because all you need is an alphabet and something to write with. And I thought, if you can do that really well, and I had always looked at writing and books as a kind of magic, as something shamanistic almost, because I knew you had to somehow be initiated into it, whether through years and years of apprenticeship or something. And I always found great power in narratives. From the time I was a child, I watched the adults around me. It was very clear to me that everyone just ran on stories, sometimes ridiculous and absurd stories. And and I always knew the TV was lying to me. Um, but so anyway, I thought, well, I'll study literature and philosophy, and since I don't want to be poor, I'll go to law school. And took my LSATs because I was like, well, at least if I have to show up and go to work every day of my life, I at least want to get paid well for it. And I like to argue and I like to speak in public, so I thought I'm analytical. I thought it'd be a good fit. And I took my LSATs and did really well, and I was planning on going to a really good law school. And I had so many electives left over that my last semester of college, I took an independent study course called Writing a Novel. And I was like, that sounds kind of interesting, fun. I have no idea how one would do something like that, but I talked to the teacher, and the teacher said, well, look, I don't expect you to like write a great novel. Just if 3 times during the semester you turn in 30 pages to me, and I feel like you're really trying, you'll get an A, you'll pass. And so I did that, and I just started writing off the fly this kind of semi-autobiographical thing, and the teacher was hugely supportive and said, I think you should try to finish this. If you got your LSAT scores, those are good for 5 years. Why don't you just take a semester or a year off and try to finish this? I'll give it to my agent. I'll help you any way I can. And so he kind of put it into my head that I could do this if I really wanted to. And so I graduated and I moved to Austin for the first time. And I had intended to finish that book, but that teacher died about a month after I left. And so I just ended up kind of bartending and hanging out for 4 years. And then around age 23 or 24, I thought, well, you need to get serious about something. So either you should give this writing thing a real try or go to law school. And so I had never even written short stories before, but I wrote some stuff to apply to MFA programs, and I wasn't going to pay for it. I didn't think it would do anything for me as a career. I just wanted those 3-4 years to just focus on this. And if nothing happened, or if I thought I wasn't very good.
What's funny, Nick, is my dad was an English major. I was a philosophy major, and then we both did the law school thing. My dad also does the writing and played in the NFL and all that good stuff. But it's funny. It's kind of piecing it all together.
Yeah. And so I ended up going to grad school in Arkansas, and the first 2 short stories I wrote for a workshop were sold to the Atlantic monthly. And that kind of kicked me off. And kept writing short stories and, eventually a novel. But I had always thought if I ever had my opportunity to get my foot anywhere in the door of the film and TV industry, I was going to kick it down.
When you were writing the short stories, did you have, was it based on things from your childhood? Was it based on things you saw, or it was just truly organic?
I mean, it was organic. I mean, I took a lot of settings from places I knew, and this sort of landscape of the imagination that had developed for me in my youth and the first part of my adulthood. But really, I think I try to write about emotions I understand and know, but I find fictional characters and dramatic situations to enact those emotions. And so I don't take things from life. I am working on something autobiographical that I have no idea when or in what form it would be released, but generally I just make stuff up, and there's pieces of me in every character. But at the end of the day, when I'm doing my job right, I don't feel like I'm even really creating. I feel like I'm a vessel for something, and I'm just letting these other characters talk, these other people who aren't like me and haven't had my life. And when that happens, and I feel the spirit, my job then is to just get out of the way, and I'll figure out a dramatic structure for this later. But I guess the short answer for what you asked is that I might start with a situation, or I might start with a character, but very quickly the characters take over and show me the story they're going to enact.
How much of your work is a rebellion against where you're from, and how much of it is a tribute?
That's a great question. I think for the first half of my life and a lot of my initial success, there was my motivations had a lot to do with spite, for the life I'd had and where I came from, and a lot of it had to do with unconsciously trying to justify my existence, trying to prove I had a right to be here and that I belonged in the world, and that kind of that classic overachiever thing. Like some traumatized people tend to turn it into a propensity for accomplishment. And I think a certain amount of it was involved in that. But at the same time, I do not hate where I came from. And I think it's very unhealthy to, especially at my age. So when I say I ran on these things a bit, in the first half of my life, I do think it's important in the second half of life to find that moment where you hit pause and you really look at what you've been running on, and what motivations you've been using, and what scripts you were living out, and if those were actually narratives that were true to your character, or were they habituations and adaptations you developed in order to survive. But I think if you hate where you come from, that means you hate a part of yourself, and I wouldn't recommend it. I have a complicated relationship with it. It's a bit like Quentin Compson at the end of Absalom, when he's told this huge long story of this family, and his roommate at Harvard says, "Well, I understand why you hate the South now." And he says, "But I don't hate it. I don't hate it. I don't." And sometimes I kind of feel like that. And I think at the end of the day, what I did with where I came from was I tried to put it into the imaginations of the world, the way it lived in my imagination, and to show what was beautiful and terrible about it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, in my imagination, it's a dark, twisted place.
Many places are.
Yeah, true.
I read that you left home at 17. Did you leave for college, or was there some friction you wanted to escape?
It was both those things. I left for college, and I really needed to get out of my house. My father passed in 2023, and we had an untenable relationship, and it was important that I get away from him. And then from there proceeded a long exile from home. I didn't go home very much, even for holidays, and many Christmases spent alone.
Did you ever reconcile with your dad, or not really?
No, we did. It was complicated, and this thing happened to me in January of 2020. Well, really, it happened to my oldest daughter. and and she was in a real bad situation that I I don't want to tell this story because it's her story to tell, and she will. But my family, and especially my father, helped me get her back when she was spotted in Lake Charles, and my dad did a really beautiful thing for me. Um, and and that was something that was very healing for me in the arc of my life, because I got full custody of my daughter, unchecked, and the reason she was saved was because all these people I had let go of, my family back home, and all these faces I had turned away from, including my father. She was saved because all those hands reached out for us. And a lot of things were healed between me and my family at that time. And my dad had a really beautiful moment with me where he apologized extensively, and he was in tears. And I just told him, Dad, you helped me get my daughter back. All is forgiven. I have nothing but love for you, Dad. And we had a beautiful reconciliation. And I wish I could say it lasted, but I invited him to my wedding, and he came, and things did not go well. And they went so not well that his wife of 20 years left him at my wedding. And then he was living in this little bachelor pad in Lake Charles for a year. And one night he'd taken some pills and drank some booze and passed out on the couch. And he rolled off the couch onto the concrete floor and broke his neck. And he was like that for a day. He couldn't move until he had the idea to yell, "Siri, call 911." And somewhere in his house, the phone called 911. And they got him, but he spent the last 6 months of his life as a paraplegic. And we found out through the doctors and stuff that he had basically been on street drugs for about 40 years, in addition to being a very serious drinker and a very volatile one. So when I figured that out, that made a lot more of my childhood make sense. And I witnessed his last rites, and before he went, I told him I loved him, and I thanked him for being my father, and I let him know it was all good, and that whatever came next for him, I did not want him carrying guilt around me into that.
That's powerful. I bet he appreciated that. Well, your artistic career served you well and earned you a visual arts scholarship to LSU. How did that start? And do you still have any of those old works?
I think my mom does. I think it started from me just being a kid alone in a room, and I had a propensity for drawing, and I just nurtured it. I would draw comic books for myself, and then as I moved into high school, I started doing things that were a little more technically serious, with mediums and stuff. And when I switched over into writing and really storytelling, a lot of that energy, that's sort of where all that energy went. All the energy I used to do for visual arts, but I probably should still practice it just for the sake of having a hobby. and the kind of instant gratification you can feel with the visual arts. As you know, with writing, it's so abstract for so long, and then you get it down, and it's not good enough, and it's got to get better, and it's just such a long process. Where visual art, it's a bit more like music. You see the results right away, and the results are tied to the physical action of what you're doing.
Did you have a favorite kind of like theme or work something you like to work on?
No, I mean, a lot of people said my pictures were pretty sad. I think my mom still has some of them, and she used to ask me that as a kid, like, why are you always drawing such sad stuff? I don't know. Yeah, there were artists that moved me and artists that didn't, but I didn't formally know much, and I was really just channeling my childhood experience into these kind of emotional expressions using figures, or else I was creating superheroes or something.
How did you make the transition to being a writer and both an English and philosophy major, and what compelled you to philosophy? Did you realize how you would incorporate the philosophy into your writing, or did it happen by chance? Did you have a mentor helping you?
Nick, they never let philosophy majors just be philosophy majors. There's always got to be something behind it, right?
Yeah. No, I think I started studying philosophy because I wanted to figure this out. I didn't know what life was, and I didn't understand why I was so unhappy. And I didn't understand why the world was so fallen, at least to me. And the things that the people around me seemed to take such delight in and meaning, I didn't. And so I sort of had this idea that I would learn about life that way, and in this way I could figure it out. See, my thing was that I was always trying to figure things out. Like there's got to be a switch on this engine somewhere to turn it on and make things work and be fulfilled and have a real love and have real work to do. And then you probably found something similar as a philosophy major yourself, Troy, that then I learned that literature actually had the answers I was looking for, and philosophy had no answers whatsoever. Philosophy was rhetorical games and forensics, but literature had the feeling of real life, and you can read a character from a 19th century Russian novel whose existential dilemma perfectly describes your inner life. And suddenly the world is less lonely. And suddenly you can imagine that you're not some hopeless freak for the things you think, that in fact people have been here feeling the same things you do for a long, long time. And so my philosophical interests quickly became literary interests. And I don't, except for the pessimism expressed in season 1 of True Detective, I don't actively insert philosophy into my work. That was a special occasion. I think a philosophy tends to play out in my work in prose or film and TV, insofar as a vision of the world is being articulated and value judgments are being made and hierarchies are emerging. But I don't, again, except for with Russ Cole, I don't seek to philosophize if I write. It's just about the characters. It just so happened that one particular character articulated a lot of pessimistic philosophy.
It's funny hearing you talk about books and the way my dad describes it. Dad, I don't want to talk for you, but my dad always said to me when I was younger, for him, when he was younger, he had his own kind of things he was battling. And he said his books were like, it was like you could time travel. It's like
Yes.
he left the world and he was in the book. He was no longer in, wherever he was, whatever situation he was in, he was there with the characters.
Yeah, that's how I felt, and also that it expanded me. It expanded my sense of myself and my sense of the world, and and there's really nothing like it, and especially in this day and age, I think we all benefit from returning to the written word and pages and books, and I still regard it as something that's very close to magic. It's this old Stone Age magic where I'm going to take these 26 symbols, and with just 26 symbols and nothing up my sleeve, I'm going to give you a vision of the world that is as nuanced and complicated and mercurial as the life we all lead. I'm going to capture the experience of consciousness with just 26 symbols. And there's something very primal and human about that to me too.
Books are such an underrated and powerful tool. I hope more people today can find that magic you're talking about. Nic, when you graduated, you moved to Austin.
Mm-hmm.
You were a technical writer and a bartender for 4 years. What gave you the courage to incur the costs of a Master of Fine Arts at the University of Arkansas?
Well, I think that's a funny use of the word courage, because that'll really put all those soldiers and astronauts in their place. Well, like I said, the MFA didn't cost me anything. So if you got in at Arkansas, you got a tuition waiver and a scholarship, because I would not pay for a master's in fine arts in anything. And so it was just about me having the time to do that, and I hadn't been setting the world on fire. I'd been more doing all the partying I didn't do in college for a few years, and then I thought, okay, this is gonna keep getting old, and I need to focus on something. Yeah, and in Arkansas, I liked the place. They had some really good writers who had come out of there, and the price was right.
Nothing like free.
Yeah.
Then you win all these awards for your short stories and even a grant, so there go the money concerns. That's when you wrote a novel, Galveston. With your master's in fine arts, you earned excellent teaching jobs at the University of North Carolina and the University of Chicago. What was that like?
Well, I wouldn't say the money troubles ever went away till I was about 30, 36, and I came to Hollywood. The novel, well, teaching wasn't something I'd ever intended to do. It was just, it was what I was qualified for. And when I look back, I maybe should have gone out to LA then, after I got my master's. But I spent a few years teaching, and enjoyed a lot of it. Really enjoyed taking students through great works of literature and teaching them to read like writers. But that was never a career I could have stayed in. I can't handle bureaucracies. Somebody once described academia, it might have been Robert Stone, the novelist, as the most vicious of fights for the lowest stakes imaginable. And that was kind of how I found it. And the novel Galveston, I wrote that after I had spent 2 years writing a novel I pulled from publication because I didn't think it was very good. And it was almost like an intellectual exercise. Like I didn't really have a story to tell so much as I was trying to show how smart I was or something. And it was in galleys when I decided not to publish it. Because even though my short story collection had been published by a small publisher and nobody saw it, I thought, at least by my standards, I had not written anything bad yet. And if I had let that novel be published, that wouldn't be true. And so then I really felt up against it. I had a child on the way. And so I ended up writing Galveston in about 2 months, waking up at 5 in the morning, shooting a 5-hour energy, and writing till like 8:30 whenever I had to go in to teach. And, luckily the novel got me a literary agent, and Scribner published it. And in 2010, it was published in the summer of 2010. And Dennis Lehane, the great American novelist, he gave it a really generous, really great review in the New York Times Book Review. And then I got a call from my lit agent that some agents in Hollywood had gotten my book optioned, and it was just for like $8,000 or whatever. But I said, well, what people? And he said, oh, they're literary agents in Hollywood that I work with. And I said, they work with like screenwriters and showrunners and stuff? And he said, yeah. And I said, I would like to talk to these people. Can I do that? And so he got him to call me, and I can tell you that story later or whenever, but that was the first time I talked to anyone who actually worked in Hollywood. And that eventually led to me going out there by the end of summer.
I want to get into that, but first I have to ask, have you ever done any skydiving or base jumping? I only ask because of your short story, Ghost Birds.
Yeah, I skydived in Texas in like 1999, maybe, something like that. And did a kind of base jumping in Switzerland in 2003. And that was actually after I had written that base jumping story. And, those are like two things I would never dream of doing now. But when I had a more self-destructive streak in me, I had a propensity to tempt fate a little bit, we might say.
All right, back to Hollywood. You decide to go out to California to write for TV and end up writing several scripts, one of which is the pilot for True Detective, Unreal.
So how did those conversations go when you spoke to those guys?
Well, it was two women who were both still my agents. And at the time they had a boutique literary agency that, a lot of what they did was they got literature or books optioned. And so I asked, and so they could, I talked to them. I said, well, what do I have to do to be considered to write the screenplay for this novel adaptation? And while I got you on the phone, how do I get into TV writing? And while we're talking, how do I become a showrunner? Because I've been reading about that, and I think I'd be really good at it. And, and I think every novelist they've ever sold anything for has asked those questions, like, how do I get some of that Hollywood money? And but I really wanted to be in the form, and this is at a time when, we had just had what I think was the real golden age of TV, like Sopranos was on, Breaking Bad, The Wire, Deadwood, Mad Men, and so the agents, kind of chuckled and said, well, have you ever written scripts? And I said, no. And they said, well, you have to write scripts. And I said, okay, what kind of scripts do you need me to write? And they said, well, if you want to get into TV, and this will help you if you want the job to write Galveston, you need to write a really great spec script of an existing TV show and a really great pilot for an original show you make up. And they said, if you do that and they're really good, we can get you meetings. And then it's up to you when you get a meeting, what happens after that. And I said, okay. And I could tell they weren't taking me too seriously. So I wrote 6 TV scripts in 5 weeks. And one of them was a spec script for Justified, which was on the air at the time. 3 of them were 3 episodes of an original show I created that was set in Lake Charles, where I'm from, and revolved around one of the casino riverboats. And then another one was a pilot for a show about bull riders. And then the other one was the pilot for True Detective. And funnily enough, they didn't use the True Detective pilot for anything. They sent out the original show about the place I grew up and the spec script. But I started, I got meetings from every place they sent out a script to. And so I flew out to LA and took a bunch of meetings, and almost every one of them resulted in me getting offered a job. And so another round of meetings and meeting people and then flying back home. My first jobs were, I got a staff writing job on an AMC show called The Killing, which was in its first season. And I got a blind pilot deal at HBO, but that was for the bull riding show. They hadn't even seen True Detective. And so I worked for about a year and a half, almost 2, when I got there and asked out of The Killing during the second season. And, I was told I was hurting my career by doing that. And then 4 months later, I sold True Detective, which I had kept for myself. And I wasn't going to let somebody else do True Detective. Like it wasn't for sale. But by the time I sold it, I knew how to make television because of my experience on The Killing, and which was sort of training for all that.
Did you know, at that point, it sounds like you were saving True Detective. Was that your favorite out of what you'd written at that time?
Yeah, I thought it was the most ambitious, and I thought it had a chance to connect to a broad audience because of its genre. And, so what I like to do is work in a genre that I like, and that's really like almost any genre. But if you can fulfill the surface requirements of whatever genre you're working in, like if it's a mystery, there needs to be a certain amount of suspense and tension and mounting narrative that coheres around the clues we experience and stuff. But if you can fulfill those surface requirements, you can then do all kinds of deeper, more nuanced work. And I like the device I'd given myself in True Detective of the interrogations, where I can have characters essentially monologuing as part of the story and as structurally necessary for the story. And Cole was very close to me. Cole was a very dear character to me, and I just couldn't have imagined handing it off to somebody else to go do whatever they wanted with it.
I was going to ask you how similar was the pilot that you wrote then to the pilot episode? Was it?
It's exactly the same.
Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to have Moleskine notebooks that were, because originally before I got the conversation in Hollywood, I was thinking about my next novel. And I had this idea of like a novel, there were these 2 detectives who'd been partners, and every chapter would be in one of their voices. So they would alternate chapters and speaking in voices. And then when I started writing about it, I was like, well, this would almost be better as a 2-man stage play. Like you could just have 2 guys on stage telling this story. And then I was like, but this might really be good as a television show, is what it would be good at. And I used to have the old Moleskines, but you could look at the Moleskine with the handwriting and like the date on it of 2010, and it's like there's some monologues by Cole that made it all the way intact from that notebook to the shooting scripts.
I think I heard you say something to the effect that the novel is dead and the feature film is dying. How so?
I don't think the novel's dead, and what I think happens is that forms and mediums are replaced in the hierarchy of how people experience their narratives. I don't. I hope movies come back. I love going to the movie theater, and I love cinema of all kinds. But when you look at what the biggest audiences were, it was film and television that dominated the 20th century. Those are the 20th century's art forms. And I think what often happens is a medium comes along, and then and by arriving, it retroactively legitimizes the medium that was popular before it. So, like when Shakespeare was writing his plays, those plays were for the plebes. Those plays were for the commoners. The intelligent aristocrats. They read poetry and Greek and Latin. And then when we started serializing novels and periodicals, well, like Dickens and Dumas, well, those were for the hoi polloi and the plebeians and stuff. And what intelligent people did was they went and saw Shakespeare. And then cinema comes along, and then it's, oh, well, the cinema's for dum-dums. Really smart people read novels. That's what the smart people do. And then television came along, and television was for dum-dums. And the really smart people went to the cinema and the theater and read novels. And then the internet comes along, and suddenly television is what the smart people are doing. The smart people watch television. Don't you watch The Wire and Deadwood? That's the modern War and Peace, and the internet's for dum-dums. And these things have a way of just replacing each other and also legitimizing whatever the form was before them. And I don't think the novel is dead or dying. I think its relevance as a cultural mover is almost non-existent nowadays. Some of that has to do with publishing and what's happened in the publishing world insofar as narrowing the type of books that make it to the shelves. But most of it has to do, I think, with technology and the type of education people get these days. The written word takes work. A novel is a circuit between the author and the reader. And the reader has to put time and energy into that circuit. And, the things that were true in the 20th century about literature, I don't know that we'll ever have that again. Like I don't think you could have a writer as universally known as Shakespeare. As universally known as Hemingway again, because books don't have that kind of wide impact anymore. And, one day I'm going to write some more. And I think about it a lot, but I'm also pretty realistic with myself about how big an impact any novel can have, really. And the audience has become so fragmented for TV now that's a lot harder too. People watch YouTube videos, people play video games, and we have such a glut of content that I think a lot of people don't. I think a lot of people are overwhelmed with the level of content, and so even in film and TV, we've seen the audience atomizing, and in film, They're making so few of them nowadays, and so few just good adult movies that don't involve a superhero or fantasy franchise of some kind.
That's what I was gonna say. It's hard to. I can't. I mean, every movie now is it's a superhero movie or an
Yeah,
animated movie or.
I we saw that movie Black Bag a couple weeks ago with Michael Fassbender and Kate Blanchett. It's a Soderbergh movie, and that was great. And I posted about it. I was trying to tell people to go see it because it was just an intelligent adult movie with a great marriage at its center. And I was just so pleased that it got made at all and that it was so good. I wanted everybody to go see it and give them their money.
I feel like that way with TV too. I think there's so much bad. Obviously, I don't think this about True Detective, but there's so much bad television that's just like, and most of it's reality garbage, but where it's just like you hear the writing, you hear like what it's about, or you see like what the plot is, and it's like, how is this ever made? How did this get greenlit all the way through?
Yeah, and there's definitely good stuff out there, but I find myself mostly watching old movies I know I already love.
In TV shows, because I feel like when you have a great movie, like The Departed is one of my favorite movies of all time. And the only thing about that movie, like my only complaint would be that it's not longer. Whereas like
Huh.
take a show like Breaking Bad or True Detective or one of those, and it's like you get to see, use Russ as an example. You get to see him over 8 seasons. Like you get 8 hours of him rather than when you have these amazing characters that like they build them up, and then they're gone.
Yeah, well, I got to do both of those things because every time I would, have these characters I loved for a season, I had to let them go because they're not coming back. Yeah, the TV series can have a lot of the positives that a novel has insofar as it can be discursive. It can go in branching directions. You can take time to really sit with one character's story. Whereas a film, its narrative pleasures are probably closer to the short stories. Insofar as it has a clear beginning, middle, and end, and it needs to get there generally as economically as possible. And that's, I think you can have, I think there is such a thing as a perfect short story. I don't think there's anything that's a perfect novel because the novel's so unwieldy. It contains so much. And it's generally small things that are capable of perfection. The larger something is, however beautiful, the more imperfect it'll grow.
Let's talk about the masterpiece of True Detective, the show that literally blew up HBO's streaming service at the season 1 finale. It is widely regarded as the best single season of television and also won 5 Emmys. The fan in me could talk about each season for hours, but I'll try to just hit the highlights. So, with season 1, did you know how good it was when you wrote it, or were you surprised at the reaction?
I mean, in all humility, yeah, I knew how good it was for me. Like I believed in what I'm doing, and I'm the arbiter for myself about whether I've done something good or not. And if I do something that's exactly what I wanted to do and it doesn't connect with people, I'm fine with that. I'm totally okay with that. What I'm not okay with is if I went to do something and I didn't get to do what I wanted to do, and so now it's not even what I wanted, and whether it connects to people or not is beside the point for me at that point. But I knew, I mean I knew I was making something that I would love to watch, and then being on set and working with Matthew and Woody and seeing what we were getting, I thought, yeah, this is going to be very good, or at least it's going to be everything I hoped it would be. I had thought it would probably have decent critical response, and be a beloved cult show. Like I also thought it was probably a bit weird and esoteric for such a massive audience. And then it blew up instantly. And, then I realized, well, that's the benefit of putting all this weird shit inside a gothic lethal weapon. Kind of what it is. But it 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 was true to the vision we had set out to make, and that show changed my life. That show is why I have a house, and I'm still friends with those guys. Matthew's a neighbor of mine, and Woody just moved to Texas, so it's great to see them. And it 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 was a really massive fork in the road for me in my life, for sure.
I don't know anything about the whole world of show, but anything about Hollywood. I know nothing about it. But when you're, I think I've had a good life. That means,
yeah.
when you're like, you wrote the show and you're working with HBO, when you find out that you got, Woody and Matthew are coming on the show. I mean, how do you get that news? And when that happened, were you just like, holy crap, this is amazing?
Well, we did that. That wasn't HBO.
Oh, okay.
When we took the show out to sell, we already had Matthew and Woody attached. And the other producers had some kind of definite ideas about, what actors could play Cole and Hart. And they kept suggesting these kind of younger actors to me who were really popular. But I said, no, these need to be men. These need to be overtly masculine men who have lived a life, like their life is written on their faces. And we talked about Woody early, and we were told that Woody Harrelson did not want to play a cop again. He'd just done Rampart, and Woody Harrelson was never going to do TV again. It was what one of his reps told us, and said, okay. And I was just racking my brain for weeks trying to think of, who could play Cole. Because this is something that's always rubbed me wrong, is they kept suggesting these kind of overtly intellectual actors for Cole, sort of nerd characters. And they're like, because he's such an intellectual. And I was just like, yeah, handsome guys who kick ass can be intellectuals too, like this nerd jock dichotomy has never seemed to present itself in real life to me. Some of the best and most physically capable men I know are also some of the smartest with the most personal integrity. But anyway, I watched The Lincoln Lawyer because, for 10 years, Matthew had just been this rom-com guy. And The Lincoln Lawyer was like the first time in a long time he had just been a non-rom-com lead. And I was like, oh yeah, this guy's a man. And so I suggested him to the producers, and none of them could see it. And they all thought, well, maybe for Hart, he could be Hart. He could be like the family man or whatever. But I remembered the Matthew from Reign of Fire, the dragon movie. And I remembered him playing this character in a Bill Murray movie. And the character he played was Tip Tucker, long distance trucker, who was this meth head trucker. And I thought somewhere between that guy and the shaved head guy who kills dragons, somewhere in the middle was probably a good Cole. And I knew Matthew had just done Mud with Jeff Nichols, and that he was doing Killer Joe, a Tracy Letts play. He was doing that for William Friedkin. And I knew he was going to do Dallas Buyers Club. And I was like, well, if this guy's doing stuff like that, he might want to do something like this. But the other producers would only let me submit to him for the role of Hart. And I said, okay, because I knew any actor that reads this script is going to want to play Cole. Like, they're not going to read the script and go, I want to be that heart guy. They're going to want to be Cole. And so then I thought, so if he reads it and if he likes it, he's going to want to play Cole. And then they're going to have to let him play Cole because, hey, guys, you have a movie star who wants to play Cole now. And this was before movie stars were on TV like they are now. And that's exactly what happened. Is Matthew read it and he loved it, but he said, I want to play Cole, which I thought was great. And so then we all talked to him about it, and he asked us about who was going to play Hart. And, we said, we don't know. We're looking at this person, that person. And he asked us if we'd ever thought about Woody Harrelson. And we said, yeah. Could you help us with that maybe? And we told him what Woody's agent had told us. And he goes, let me talk to him. Let me talk to him. So Matthew got us Woody.
Wow, that's awesome.
And then when we took the series to market, we had those 2 stars attached and 2 scripts. So the good thing about that, in addition to it just being a hot commodity at the time, was the show it has already been formed. There's not going to be opportunities for the network to develop it or change it because, I'm nobody, but Matthew and Woody are 2 500-pound gorillas, and they signed on to make this, not something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how that all worked.
Was there anybody that was almost like, I can't even imagine anyone else playing Russ or Marty, but was there anybody that was almost those characters or no?
No, I mean, that's a weird thing in Hollywood too, where they'll be like you could be like, oh, well, I heard Christian Bale almost got this role. And you're like, no, like if you're sitting in a room talking about what actors could you see in something, of course Christian Bale's they're going to be like, what about Christian Bale? That doesn't mean, he almost got the role or that he wanted the role or anything like it. And in that way, lots of people's names came up, but nobody else had a shot at it. Matthew was the first guy who said, I want to play Cole. And he's who I wanted to play Cole.
In True Detective, so much is unsaid. The silence between lines says more than the words. Do you think silence is more honest than dialogue?
I don't think it's more honest. I think it can be just as telling if you set it up in the right way. And I write those silences into my script. And I mean, as much as you can, I direct actors on the page. So, I might write a line that's something like, Cole doesn't respond, but pensively considers the facts of the scene with some disappointment. And that's not to say that actor is going to convey the exact emotions I put on page and that the audience is going to know that. But what it does give the actor is a base of emotional complexity to work with. And so within the silences between characters, we may not know exactly what they're thinking, but the emotional complexity of what they're going through resonates with us, I think. When Stephen Dorff was auditioning for season 3, and he was just reading through the script, and he was like, I mean, every time it says because I'll write a beat, silence, dash, and then the next line. He's like, you just want me to run through these silences though, right? I'm just gonna, I was like, no, we keep the silences here. Go ahead and do the silences.
You wrote all 8 episodes yourself. What's the cost, personally and professionally, of being the sole voice behind a show like that?
I don't think professionally it cost me anything other than the first season I did it, people seemed somewhat offended that I had done it. Personally, I mean, that was very taxing. Because I'd had the first 2 episodes written for a while. Then when it sold, everybody else went off and said, okay, well, we're going to go live our lives. And you get us those 6 episodes you owe us, so we can start the show. And I was working out of a garage in Burbank by myself, and my walls were covered in Post-it notes. I mean, it looked like Cole's storage unit, kind of, like just everywhere, or A Beautiful Mind or something. All these notes that nobody could make sense of but me, and took about 3 months to write the next six. And yeah, I mean, I, I don't live my life this way anymore, but I was just churning them out, and I would finish an episode and drink a bottle of whiskey to reset my brain. And then 2 days later, I'd start the next episode. And I think by the time I got to the end, I was pretty frayed, psychologically and physically. You know, it just took a lot out of me. But I tend to do things like that. I'll work in these great bursts of marathon energy, and then I will be completely shiftless for days, if not weeks after.
Did the writing get easier when you knew, like, when Cole was Matthew, or Matthew was Cole, and
I don't know if it got easier, but it it helps. I like to have my roles cast for sure, and things I've written that have then been cast, I'll go back and rewrite the character to better fit the speech cadences and the energy I get from a certain actor, because I want my roles to be like bespoke suits for actors. Like it fits their particular form perfectly, and it lets them do things that I see in them, even if they haven't been seen much before that. Um, so I definitely tailor roles to the actor. And once we had Matthew and Woody, you know, I mean, it might have been easier just in the sense of, you know, this is real,
mm,
like this is going to happen, and and I can see these two guys in my head now, and I know what they look like, and I can hear their voices.
Matthew McConaughey said, Russ Cole was the greatest detective I ever met. What did you see in McConaughey that made you trust him with a character like Russ?
Well, I had seen Matthew's movies, and I knew the kind of professional choices he was making. Um, but it's sort of like I said, between playing that methamphetamine using trucker in the Bill Murray movie, and playing this, you know, super high testosterone dragon slayer in Rain of Fire, I felt like Cole was somewhere in there. And then as I got to know Matthew personally, I just thought it was absolutely perfect that you know, he's such a singular person, and has such a unique way of seeing the world and seeing people, and and I admire a great many things about Matthew. Um, One of the things I most admire is how he manages himself, and how he shows up for other people, and how he makes his emotions are nobody else's problem but his. And you know, I've just, in the 10 years since, I've just grown to love him more and more. But I knew as an actor he could do it, and then as I got to know him as a man, I realized like he was absolutely perfect for it. And then to be able to write to him, all those things came together in his performance, I think.
on the spectrum of the truck driver, did you have Crash in mind at that point?
Yeah, Crash was. I mean, I already had those guys' whole biographies. I could tell you what Cole did for his 5th birthday, and you know how I knew how he got to be in Louisiana CID and stuff. So yeah, that was sort of my thing. It was like, this guy isn't Sherlock Holmes. He's just going to outwork everybody else, and he does not give a shit. You know, he's uncompromising, and he's an absolutist. And for me, that's an enjoyable person to write.
You ended up becoming great friends with Woody and Matthew. What made your relationship with them more than just the typical writer-actor bond?
I mean, I can't speak for them. I just liked them, and I liked hanging out with them. And you know, I didn't like it wasn't any kind of movie star thing to me. I remember one day, like first or second week of filming, I was sitting alone at Video Village, and of everywhere to sit with all these empty chairs, Matthew came and sat by me. And I was just kind of thinking, great, here come the questions. You know, the actor's just going to want to know everything. And he didn't say anything. He just sat there in silence, same as me. And then we both just sat there in silence while they reset the next shot. And then I thought, I like this guy. I like that. You know, like that's my kind of guy. And then there was one night early on in filming when we were just looking at some dailies that had been spliced together just to kind of see what we were getting. And we both got excited, and Woody was there and their wives were there. And Matthew and I drank a lot. And Woody would tell you it was like the most fascinating interaction he'd seen between two people. Because I think we each drank a bottle of tequila, and you know, and things just got a bit rowdy. But I'm not again, like, I don't know if that's a story I should tell, but the next Monday when it was time to go to work, I was just like, you know, I was wondering, like, Jesus Christ, did I punch my leading man Saturday night? What happened? Like, I didn't, but and so I was just kind of hiding out on set, like avoiding the principal's office or something. And he comes up behind me and tickles me. And he's like, "Hey, buddy," and I was like, "Oh, hey, man. So like, we're cool, right?" He's like, "Oh, we're so cool, brother." And I said, "You know, you're a strange man." And he goes, "Yeah, so are you. And now we know." And he was just always so good to me. I mean, he gave me great advice. I always had this feeling he just as a guy, he really wanted me to do well. And yeah, and then Woody, I mean, I just crack up around Woody all the time. And you know, we started conversations with them, getting information from me about the scenes we're going to play and about the characters they're playing, and it just evolved into hanging out.
Do you have a favorite moment or scene from season 1?
You know, I don't think I do. So I did not watch season 1 after it aired, ever, until November 2023. My wife had just had our baby, and my father was in hospice because of his accident. And so my wife and I are just living in this baby tunnel where we're in the newborn's room, and one of us is napping and one of us has the baby, and then we switch off, and you know, we're barely leaving that room for days at a time. And it was getting close to the 10th anniversary of season 1, and Sue suggested we watch it. And so we'd watch one episode a night, and it was a very emotional experience for me. You know, I had found the great love of my life. We had a newborn baby, and I'm visiting this work it's so emblematic of my life before all this, and me as a much younger man, and the obsessions and drives I had. And something that was very touching for me, I wouldn't call it a favorite scene, but when Cole's talking about his father, he explains that his dad was a character, and his dad was really hard on him. And the cops ask him, "Well, are you still mad at him, your dad?" He goes, and Cole goes, "I wasn't not mad at him." He goes, "But you guys didn't like each other." He goes, "I didn't say that." Or the guy said, "But you used to be." And he goes, "I never said that. I said we didn't like each other. It's a different thing." And he said, and given everything that happened to me after I left home, when I look back on my dad, I think he was kind of preparing me for what was going to come. And he takes a drag on his cigarette and he says, "So in that way, he was a friend to me." And I at the time I found that very touching, because my father's dying. I have a new baby in my arms, and it was one of those things I'd forgotten I wrote until I saw it, and then I remembered writing it. And just that idea that the person who hurt you the worst, that you could see them being a friend to you because they gave you reserves of strength and resilience that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And then I had to admit to myself there, again, while my father's dying in the hospital, that if it hadn't been for him, there would be no True Detective. That if he hadn't put me on a certain course, I wouldn't have retreated into fantasy, and I wouldn't have become a storyteller, and I wouldn't have told the type of stories I did. So, how could I have any resentment against that man?
I almost forgot to ask you a question I have had since watching when the show first aired. Whose character do you relate to more closely, Russ or Marty? Because the dialogue between them is perfect.
Well, thanks. I mean, on a personal level, I relate to Cole. Not as much as I used to, but he was definitely very near and dear to my heart, and in certain aspects of his demeanor were mine too. Now, I've never been a truly pessimistic philosopher at all, but by the time you get to the end of season 1, and you see Cole isn't either, and I always thought the pessimistic worldview Cole was delivering was horseshit, and was a little troubled that people seemed to take it as some etched in stone truth, when to me it was obvious that this man is saying all these things by way of compensation for something else. Like if you really believe something, you don't need to say it all the time. And when Cole complains to the sky, who's he complaining to? And I felt anybody that called him a nihilist was really getting it wrong, because while he may give lip service to these philosophies, the life he leads is not the life of a nihilist at all. Nothing has meaning to a nihilist. For Cole, the whole world seems overwrought with meaning. And he spends his time trying to help and protect people who can't help and protect themselves. And none of those things seemed nihilistic to me. They seemed heroic. What I saw with Cole's pessimism was a man in denial, and a man in a great deal of pain. And he was managing his pain as best he could until he couldn't anymore.
There's so many scenes that are very memorable, but the crash scene is just so iconic. And then I don't know why this is just for me personally, but when they say like Reggie Ledoux and it flashes to him walking in that field with like the gas mask on, I remember my stomach, it felt like when you go down a drop on a roller coaster, my stomach dropped and then the episode ends. I was like, what the hell? Who the hell was that?
I was, yeah, I've heard that a few times. And people are like, where'd you come up with that? And I was like, I just thought, if I was walking through the forest in Louisiana, what would be something that if I ran into it, I would run the other way. So it was that.
All right, let's move on to season 2. Season 2 got hit hard by critics. Do you see it as misunderstood or something you would do differently now?
I don't think it was misunderstood, and I would like to think I wouldn't do anything differently now. I'm really glad about the choices I made with season 2. Now, I do wish we had more time. We ended up losing about 3 or 4 months of post-production because we were supposed to air after 2 other shows had already aired, but both of those shows had shut down for lack of script. And since we were humming along smoothly, we got bumped up, and that gave us less time to dramatize the scripts fully. I had to leave out a lot of conspiracy story stuff, and on the whole, I as a artist or craftsman, whatever, I knew I could either try to replicate some part of the formula of season 1, or I could do something completely different. And I have to do what interests me. And that's what I want the artists I admire to do. I don't want the artists I admire to repeat themselves because people told them to. I want them to follow their voice. So I made something that was, I mean, we can say it, I made something that was aggressively not like season 1. And I think I could have done a better job connecting the dots for the viewers, and I could have integrated, for instance, Vince's character's story a little better. But I'm extremely proud of season 2. I don't know anything like it, and it's a very painful season, and it was a very painful season in my life, and I was putting a lot of that into the work. So I had expected to get torched for season 2, and I also think, just from things I've read, that it's gotten reevaluated quite a bit in the 10 years since, and I feel like its vision of Los Angeles holds up.
I was going to say, I think no matter what you did, people were so ravenous for season 1 that they were. And did you get a ton? I mean, the pressure must have been ridiculous to make season 2 like a continuation, right? Or did people?
Well, no, it had always been pitched as an anthology, and that was going to keep it interesting for me too,
But after the reaction, people didn't come to you and say, "Come on, look at this." We got
no, I mean, you'd have to be able to get the actors for that. So it would have to be the actors coming in saying, "Come on, let's do another one." And I actually have another story for Cole and Hart that, who knows, maybe we'll do it one day. But no, and
do it.
There is pressure, but I don't feel or respond to pressure that way. I get pressure from myself, and beyond that, it doesn't exist so much for me. And pressure tends to more revolve around, am I discharging my duty correctly for me? And then in season 3, I felt comfortable enough, distance from season 1, to, okay, we can actually look at some of the tropes that we've done in the first 2 seasons, and we can deconstruct them a little bit and play off them a little bit, and maybe make these 3 disparate seasons of TV actually one big season.
On your, you kind of teased it out there, the story. Do you have Is there anything you can say about it that wouldn't give anything away?
No,
Or no?
no, it wouldn't. Because like if I said something on your show, there would be like 5 spec scripts going around Hollywood with
That's true.
No, I mean, it's character based again. That's all. But it's not something. It's not something I've written or anything. It's just I had that in my head, and we've talked about getting back together and doing it, and I think the guys are open to it. It's just a question of whether that would ever happen or not.
Was there anything from season 2 that you carried into season 3? I will say that we both really enjoyed season 2.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. The thing that got carried through from season 2 is the human trafficking aspect, and with that documentarian girl, the actor Sarah Ganon is looking into, and what her theories are in season 3.
I thought Vince Vaughn too. I mean, again,
Yeah.
I thought he really outkicked his coverage. When I first saw him not outkicked his coverage, totally outperformed what I was expecting. Well, I'm used to seeing Vince Vaughn in like the comedy kind of scenes. When I saw him in True Detective, I was like, whoa, this is different. But he did great.
Yeah, I mean, Vince is one of those guys that can do anything. And the industry will just, try to pigeonhole you into whatever you did that was most successful. But, again, I remembered Vince from 90s independent movies. And he has some great work showcased there. But before he became almost exclusively associated with comedies. And, I just directed a movie I wrote last year that stars him and Al Pacino. And I think that'll be a bit of a different Vince Vaughn for people to see too.
Now we come to season 3, which I believe I heard you say this is your favorite of the series. And I would have to agree, especially the ending. Why do you think it's better than season 1?
Better, best and stuff. I'm not sure how much those things apply. I would say it's my favorite insofar as, to me, it's the most artistically ambitious. It's telling 3 different stories in 3 different timelines, and each one is a mystery. And I don't use any tricks up my sleeve. I'm not like, we know who the killer is in the future, but we're just not going to say because it would mess with the story in the past. So it was a real high wire act for me as far as writing, in that I'm not going to keep anything from the audience. And if you're paying attention, the earlier story is going to tell you what is going to happen in the next story. And if I'm doing my job right, you don't even realize it until things start to catch up with each other. But insofar as its ambition was to really look at some of my most defining obsessions, like time, like memory, and this question of what is life? What was my life? And you can take this man's life, and we see him in 1980, and we see him in 1990, and we see him in 2015, and all those things are facets of the same man, the same character. And to have an actor like Mahershala embody that character and be able to make this man both the same person and a different person in each time period was some of the finest acting I've seen in anything, anywhere. And the ending that came to me, I found very touching and something I could believe in. In the final episode, when Mahershala's character Wayne is on the edge of figuring it out, but he can't. He has all these subconscious clues, and I didn't know this was going to happen until I wrote it. And I was flying from LA to Fayetteville, because we were deep into production on season 3, and I was still writing the finale. And I knew how I wanted it to end, but I wasn't sure how I'd get there. And I was wearing sunglasses and I was typing on the plane. And the scene I was just describing is when he has his second hallucination of his wife. And his wife puts the story together for him. And these words just came out of me unplanned, and I didn't even have anything like this written down somewhere. But when his wife tells him, what if the ending's not the ending at all? And she says, what if it's all one long story that just keeps going and going until it heals itself? Wouldn't that be a story worth telling? Wouldn't that be a story worth hearing? And I got tears in my eyes on the plane because I'd never thought about life that way. And once I heard his character say it, I realized that's what I believe. And my heart broke for those characters. It broke for everybody I'd written. And so at the end of season 3, we can talk about this because every season of True Detective, some part of reality has then acted out. Like season 1, there was all these reportings of the murder of all these prostitutes in Jefferson Davis Parish in Louisiana. And that reporting didn't start until the series was almost done airing. And yet the journalism and the book that resulted, I believe it's called Murder on the Bayou, describe a lot of the world as season 1. In season 2, there was something where the mayor of Bell Gardens got shot and killed by his wife, and Bell Gardens was a city I'd named Vinci for. And in season 3, for a long time, I was like, what came? Did anything come true in season 3? And I remembered then that in season 3, all the daughters are saved. And about a year to the date of season 3's airings, I got full custody of my daughter. And then, if you remember, at the end of season 3, he finds the lost girl, and she's alive. But then he forgets what he's doing there because he has Alzheimer's.
It's so painful.
And he has to get out and go ask the lost girl where he is. And so the lost girl has to save the lost man. And I made the house number of that house 1208. Because that's my daughter's birthday. The woman even says, you're at 1208 Allegra Lane. And Allegra is my daughter's name. Then about, 10 months after I get my daughter back, and it's 2021, and I go to pick up my wife, Suzanne, for our first date, and her house number is 1208.
It all came around.
Yeah.
That scene that you're describing at the end, it's like the whole season, the whole show, that's all you want is him to find this girl. He finds her, he doesn't remember, he, like you said, asks her for help. And then when his son picks him up and he gives his son the piece of paper that really is how he cracked the whole thing. He has the hallucination, he writes the note, and the son crumples it up and I can't remember, he throws out the window or throws it in the garbage.
But then he takes it out.
He's like, just focus on your grandkids, Dad.
His son crumbles it up and he goes, just go play with your grandkids, Dad.
Yeah.
And he's going to throw it away, but then he keeps it.
Oh, he holds it. Okay. Yeah. But the whole, you're like, all of that, he finally puts it all together. But then it shows at the end, he's happy and he's with his grandkids and he's with so it's almost like he has the satisfaction of solving it. He doesn't know he solved it, but he solved it.
And the real thing, I think the real thing he was trying to solve was his own life, was who am I? And who are you at the end of all things? And if you don't have your memory anymore, what does that mean? What are you? And maybe you're much closer to being the creature that you were when you first came into the world. Maybe what's inessential about you is being burned away. And what will remain is what is most fundamental in your character. And where I was at in my journey when I made that, and the way it resolved itself, and the issues dealt with, it was just my personal favorite. to me, it managed to do what I wanted, and it was ambitious in its themes and its goals, and it has it's the one with the happy ending.
I can't believe too the acting of how, like you mentioned it earlier, but it's not even what he says, sometimes it's how he moves his face. It's just like these littlest, it's so believable.
Yeah, we had these fantastic makeup artists, and they're just cutting edge. And Mike Marino, he did all Collins makeup for the Penguin, and they're just the best in the world. But Mahershala's makeup was minimal, and his old man performance was all about how he moved, how he spoke. It was something to see. It really was. It was such a great piece of work by him.
The protagonist of season 3 is Wayne Hayes, a detective slowly losing the ability to detect. How did you approach writing the mind unraveling without losing the audience? Also, this role seems like it could not have been played by anyone other than the amazing Mahershala Ali. To be able to truly sell that is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I cannot say enough great things about Mahershala's work, and he's somebody else I really admire as a man. I mean, very much so, and he is the person he appears to be in his public appearances, and a very spiritual man, a very deliberate man, a very considered and sensitive man. For me, it was how do you not lose the audience? It's just part of that tightrope walk, right? Like that was a big part of the challenge. Is how can I have a man whose mind's disintegrating solve a mystery, and this doesn't devolve into some kind of phantasm or hallucinatory jumble of events, and that's just me doing the work, I guess. But I considered it a kind of a high wire act.
I'll ask the same thing here. Did you have a favorite moment or scene? Is there anything you felt like people missed?
I guess I don't. I'm not too attached to the responses to my work, so I don't really know if people are getting missing it or not. But I do. My favorite scene from season 3 is when old Mahershala is reunited with old Roland West, and Steven Dorff and Mahershala are on his porch talking, and that's just one of my favorite things I've ever written. I got to direct it, and those two old guys, they go, like, in that brief conversation, they like travel through every emotional arc they could have. They're friendly but light, and then they get serious, and then they're angry and resentful, and then they're sad and then ultimately reconciled to their friendship. And I just as a single scene, those two old guys on the porch was really moving to me. And we spent all day shooting it, and when we were done, Mahershala and Steven got a standing ovation from the whole crew and everything, and a lot of people got tears in their eyes.
Even that scene where, and again, I could talk about this for all day, but even that scene where he's like, "Look, Roland," like Wayne's like, "Look, Roland, whatever I did, I'm sorry." When you go back,
I don't remember. And
I don't remember.
You tell me I did something wrong. Okay, I'm sorry, but I don't remember.
In the earlier storylines, like, he never would have said so. If he thinks he did something for a reason, he would have never apologized for it.
Yeah, and you see him early, because Steven's character tells him, and you still ain't ever apologized.
Yeah. And he holds it for this 25 years of whatever. I think it's 25 years of pain and frustration, whatever, and he doesn't even remember it.
Yeah.
I think that too it's almost like symbolic of a lot of times people hold grudges or feel like this pain towards people that they might not even remember they did it. Like, it's such an insignificant thing to the person that caused it.
I know some of these things that compose the epics of our lives aren't even footnotes for the people who took part in them.
Yeah, that's so good.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
Now, I don't like to sound negative, but I have to talk about this. You had nothing to do with season 4, and it shows. I watched it all the way through, just waiting for them to pull it all together and make sense of the mess. But it ended up just being a mess. 8 hours I will never get back. Why did they even try to do the season without you? Is there any chance we get you writing season 5, or is the season over for you?
Well, I gotta be delicate. I was the one who walked away from my contract at the end of 2019, and I believe if I had given them a good script for another season of True Detective, I believe they would have gone for it. But um, I myself was spiritually tired of walking in that much darkness and dealing with such dark materials. And then I got full custody of my daughter back, and that was a situation where I really needed to be a father. Like it wasn't the type of thing where, oh, I'll just hire this au pair to raise my daughter and I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I had to step away from a lot of work in 2020. Um, so, I took myself out of that equation. And then I think it's totally right and appropriate for HBO to keep that brand going, because we built a brand. And I hope they do lots of them. And beyond that, it's probably best for me to not comment on it, just because it's not fair to the creator, and it's ultimately not fair to me either, because I had people writing me on social media sort of demanding that I answer for season 4, and that was somebody else's. So I think they did it to maintain the brand, and I think they're doing a season 5 with the same creator, and I wish them luck with it. I would return. I think that would depend on HBO leadership and them wanting something like that, and I would also have to be free. And at the moment, I'm booked up, but the future's a vast expanse, and we don't know what'll happen and what could happen.
Time is a flat circle.
Yeah, things come back around.
Yeah, we got to get that. We got to get you back involved in it. I'm not going to say it was an 8-hour mess, but it was definitely not the same.
Well, yeah. Like I said, it's just I don't think it's fair to the creators for me to comment on it much.
All right, no more talk about season 4. I don't know when you met Suzanne, but I've heard you both say God brought the two of you together. Now, you both grew up in the Catholic Church and you went to a Catholic high school, so your religious foundation is based around Jesus Christ. I'm asking because I had a religious epiphany. Unfortunately, mine wasn't as happy as your circumstances. Mine was a result of my diagnosis of ALS. I was broken when I received the news. And then, after I stopped feeling sorry for myself because I was not living my best life as God meant me to live. Now, my question for you is, what exactly happened when you met Suzanne? Did you never lose your Christ-centric religion, or was it a more agnostic discovery of God being in your life? Now, just so you know, I ask this without judgment, because Jesus himself said, "Judge not lest ye be judged."
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't mind talking about any of this stuff at all. So I was raised Catholic, and the church lost me by the time I was a teenager, because I think, like it is for a lot of young people, is they observe the hypocrisy in the adults around them. And it can seem like the mechanism of organized religion is a way for them to absolve their hypocrisy. And various things that continue in the church today make it very hard for me to relate to or support the church. But I always had a sense of God, even as a child, even in the face of some really terrible things. I had a sense of God, and it was almost like I probably fit most comfortably into what used to be called Christian mysticism. I experienced life the way I did as a child, which is almost as a mystical experience, and everything is charged with meaning and with power. And that said, I got very far away from any kind of worship and prayer. And for me, I found a personal bottom in 2017, 2018, 2019. Those were very bad times for me. And I found myself turning back. Not turning back. I found myself re-encountering Christ and certain energies for the first time. Like I was meditating a great deal, and I would start to see these visions of the Blessed Mother in my meditations. And look, I could talk about this for 3 hours. A doctor I was seeing at the time, I said, I keep seeing the Virgin Mary when I meditate. And he goes, well, what's she doing? He goes, she's just looking at me with like such love and compassion, like nobody's ever looked at me. And he says, well, have you talked to her? And I said, no. And he said, well, why don't you ask her something next time you see her and just see what happens? And I'm completely rational in understanding that these are just images rising out of my subconscious. But why this image and not another image, and so the next time I saw her, I thought I was going to ask something, but instead I just started crying, and I said, oh, mom, I fucked everything up. I'm so sorry, Mom. I fucked everything up. And in my mind, this woman just touched my face and said, oh, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. Everything is happening exactly the way it's supposed to. And then that stayed with me for a long time because I didn't know what it meant. And if things were happening the way they were supposed to, I didn't quite understand what I was doing then and what my role was. Then 2020 happened, as it did everywhere, and Los Angeles got even crazier than usual. And I moved my daughter and I to Austin so that we would be close to family, because I wanted her around cousins. And I walked away from a lot of stuff in my industry. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to walk back in. But I knew that she was the priority, and that we needed to be closer to the family that I had walked away from. And then I was living my life. I was fairly happy. I'm out with my best friend, and we're having a good time. And he says, hey, we got to go drop by this dinner party. And I was like, what? No, we don't. And he was like, yeah, I told our friend I just said we'd stop by. And I was like, well, we're having a great time. We're the life of the party. I don't want to go to a dinner party. And he goes, no, they're done with dinner. We're just going to run in. We'll have a drink, say hi, and then we'll come back out. I was like, okay. And so we go to the house and walk in. I say hi to some people, and I go to the kitchen to make a drink. And I see Suzanne, and I'm introduced to Suzanne. And I said, hey, I'm Nick. And she goes, hi, I'm Suzanne. And we shook hands, and then we sat there shaking hands for like 10 seconds in silence, just staring into each other's eyes, while people in the kitchen were like, what's going on here? What is this? And I think she had just like made some speech to everybody about how she hadn't seen anybody in a good while, and she wasn't going to even consider dating or going on a date or anything for 9 months because she had to do this and had to do that. And da, 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 da. But I found out about that later. And then I talked to her a bit while people were just, hanging out and talking. And I never hit on women, but I, the Holy Spirit compelled me or something, because like a lifetime of accumulated knowledge about talking to women came out, and we're making each other laugh. And I'm like, oh, you're a musician? Let me see your hand. Oh, you don't have much callus. And oh, you should let me read your palm. And I don't know how to read palms. I'm just like, whatever. And it's funny too, because in my meditations over the month prior, I had started getting these images of some Stevie Nicks like rocker woman. And I was like, what is this? And it kept coming back to me. And so I started listening to Stevie Nicks, who I'd never listened to. And I would get kind of choked up listening to Stevie Nicks, which didn't even make sense because I had no connection to Stevie Nicks. And I never, dated somebody who was into Stevie Nicks or something. But I did not, I didn't feel in control of myself from the moment I met Suzanne, and for months afterwards. I mean, you asked me what happened the night we met. I'm still trying to figure that out. But when we shook hands, something happened that we both recognized right away. It was like a bell had rung on some higher mathematical plane. And Susie's a beautiful woman, but my first attraction to her, and my constant attraction to her, is a spiritual attraction. I know that's what we encountered when we first shook hands and talked to each other a lot that night. And she was so funny, and we're both being really charming, and da 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 da. But she was going to leave. It was like around midnight or something, and she was telling people bye. And I saw that, and I walked over, and I was like, "What are you doing? You're leaving?" She's like, "I have to go." And I was like, "Why do you have to go?" She goes, "Because it's late." And I was like, "Well, okay. Well, don't you think we should do something about this?" And she said, "What?" And I said, "What do you mean, what? This? What do you think we should do about this?" And she's like, I don't know. I don't know. And I said, "Well, why don't you just take a walk with me? Let's just take a walk. Let's just take a walk, and then you go home. We'll just talk about it." And so we went on a walk, and we started holding hands right away, and ended up kissing, and spent the whole first night together, just talking. All PG rated. But we would spend like 10 minutes staring into each other's eyes in silence, and it was like one of the most intense and intimate things I'd ever done. And after that, I didn't see her the next day, but we went on our first date the day after, and we're just like together as much as possible ever since. And one of the things that happened when I met Suzanne was I realized how lonely I had been my whole life. Like, I knew I had a tendency to feel apart from others, and I had great friends, and friends that would lie down in traffic for me. But until I had her, I was always alone. And it didn't matter if I was in a relationship or surrounded by friends or what. And I didn't realize how lonely I had been my whole life till I met her. And she has a version of that. And our first days together, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was happening to us, because I'm 45 here, and I'm a cynical man of the world, and I'm like, yeah, this is the craziest thing that's ever. I said, this is the craziest thing that's ever happened to me, and this is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me, and I've done some cool stuff. And she was like, me too, and blah, 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 blah. And but I mean, I think we were saying I love you like 3 days in, and just couldn't not be around each other. And at this point, we've been married longer than we dated. And it was a moment in my life where I felt God very powerfully. I felt him in this third thing between us, because there's me and there's Suzanne, and then there's this third thing between us. And whatever it was when we first shook hands, whatever immediately ignited between us was not something we created. It was something we were being invited to participate in. And I think we answered it with courage and with honor, but we didn't create it. It was a love that we're allowed to participate in if we take care of it. And I still feel God in the sense of the Holy Spirit the most clearly when I'm with Suzanne. I feel it in my children. I feel it in nature. I feel it in all sorts of ways, but it doesn't feel as palpable and as powerful and as other as the sense I have when I'm with Suzanne of God between us. And she was the big happy ending to a lot of very, very hard years for me. And more than anything else in my life, there's my life before Suzanne and my life after Suzanne. Like she was the fork in the road, and the thing I had been waiting for my whole life that would let my heart fully open and raise me up. I mean, in our relationship, it takes work. We have this indestructible, abiding love, but we're both two hot-headed Italians. We fight. But something I've said about this relationship was that this relationship has never taken me anywhere I wasn't supposed to be. And being with Suzanne has led me back to myself and pushes me closer and closer to my best self. And that's her effect on me, and it's the effect of the third thing between us. But it was the great love that I did not think existed for me. I'm just I'm too lots of adjectives for that sort of thing to happen to me. And things I thought I was too broken for, and things I just thought I wouldn't get to experience. For instance, whenever I heard somebody say, "Oh, my husband's my best friend," or "My wife's my best friend," it would always low key piss me off, because I would be like, "No, you're not. Your best friend's Josh. She's not your best friend. Give me a fucking break." But then I've been lucky in this relationship that she is my best friend. She's the best friend I've ever had, and nobody and nothing in my life has loved me like Suzanne. and it's such a gift. Like, if I start talking about my wife too much, I feel like I'm bragging, you know. But you guys know her, you know what I'm talking about. And it was like it was like after 45 years of being very deprived in terms of affection and love, I like hit this mother load and have been avalanched by the love of this beautiful creature. And I still like, my favorite thing is to just hang out with Suzanne. I don't care what we're doing. You know, it's a blast, and we have a great time, and it seems to be evergreen.
It's like in your vision meditating, it all happened exactly as it's supposed to, right?
Yeah, that's sort of been my takeaway, and things happen all the time in my life that, you know, it's sort of like what you were talking about, Tim, and I find your story so heroic and moving. But there are times when I can see I'm part of a larger design, and I cannot possibly fathom the shape or nature of that design, but I feel myself in it, and I feel myself as a child of God, and that came to me two different ways. It came to me when I was broken, and it came to me when I met Suzanne, and that was the start of me becoming whole. I mean, really, I could talk about Suzanne for 2 hours. It's more interesting to me than True Detective.
Nic, you've been busy writing. I read in Hollywood Reporter that you are going to make your directorial debut on the big screen with a screenplay that you wrote starring Al Pacino and Vince Vaughn. Pretty exciting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we shot that last year in Vegas, and you know, it's still in post, so I don't know when it'll be out or exactly what its final form will be, but it was so great to get back to work. Something I've been wrestling with is that I have been working steadily since 2020 and taking a lot of good jobs, but my work under my control hasn't been in front of the public in 6 years, and that's tough for me. Which, you know, makes me reconsider writing another novel or doing something that just puts my voice out there in a more immediate way. But yeah, the film's called Easy's Waltz, and it's about a singer in Las Vegas played by Vince, and Simon Rex plays his brother, and Al Pacino is an entertainment manager at the Wynn Casino, and nobody dies. There's no murder investigation. It's just, I think, a good adult drama with some great music in it. And I'm working on a couple things for TV right now that I feel like, I guess I have to be kind of hush hush about, because the networks want to make their own announcements in their own time. But I haven't stopped writing and banked a lot of good work. I just the industry has changed so much year to year in the last 5 years that it's a lot trickier to get into production than it was when I first stepped away. And yeah, working with Al Pacino was a huge, huge personal milestone. You know, one of the good memories I have of my father was him getting me out of bed at 8 o'clock at night when I was 8 years old and saying, "Do you want to watch a movie?" Now, he never did this. He never did that in my life. And I was like, okay. And I went and I saw in the living room, he had these two big VHS boxes, which I knew this was a special movie then, because that meant he bought that movie. He did not tape it off a TV, which most of our video cassettes were. And there were two video cassettes in it. And the cover was this weird chiaroscuro drawing of a hand holding puppet strings. And I said, so what movie are we watching? And he goes, The Godfather. Shut up. I was like, okay. And that was the first time I had seen and loved movies, lots of movies, but that was the first time I'd seen a movie that, even at 8 years old, I knew this was a work of art. You know, the frames all look like these Caravaggio paintings, and I could tell by my father's seriousness that this movie meant something to him, and in a way I couldn't really understand, like the way being Italian meant something to him, the way being Catholic meant something to him. And I remember, you know, that man's face coming out of the dark and that frail accented voice intoning, I believe in America. And then to watch this movie that's all about fathers and sons and sacrifice and family with him, it was a moment that impacted my future in ways I only really began to notice in the last 10 years. And so I really, really wish he had lived long enough to see me direct Al Pacino, because that would have blown his mind, like, all the way.
What are you still hungry to create? Is there a story you've been afraid to tell?
I'm always hungry to create. I'm a creating machine. I just, my stuff's just been unproduced for the last few years. And there is a story. I'm not afraid to tell it. It's just, it's going to take a lot out of me. And once it's told, I won't be able to put it back in the box, so to speak. But it's the story of my life, or parts of my life. And a lot of it I've kind of hinted around in our discussion, but to tell this autobiographical story, which is so dramatic and dark and ends up in the most positive place unexpectedly, is something I want to do. And I want to do it for myself, and I want to do it for my fans, and I want to do it for my children. It is the one, though, that it makes me flinch when I start to write on it. I'm like, maybe I'll do this later. Like, maybe I'll get to this one later. So I've been telling it in little pieces so far, because I find I can't do it very long.
At the end of the podcast, I like to ask our guests to brag about their family. So please brag away, my friend.
Thank you. I'd love to. I have two daughters. One is 16 years old, and her name's Allegra, and she's the most resilient, sweetest kid I've ever met, and has such a great heart. I have an 18-month-old named Rosalie that, I don't know if Sue showed you guys pictures, but pretty magical baby. And, you know, the thing I brag about most, I guess, or it occurs to me to brag about most, is my wife. I just love her so much, and she's so talented, and beautiful. But, you know, most people don't realize that, like, as beautiful as she is, Suze's insides are even more beautiful. Like, the energy she brings to things, the care she brings to things, the way she always shows up with her best self and with the best of intentions for everyone. The way she loves our children, you know, it is not lost on me, and I've thought this several times, what an advantage my children enjoy by having Suzanne as their mother. Because they are so loved, and they're so understood, and they're so cared for. And then what she gives to me is just hard to put into words. It's very touching. If I start to talk about Suzanne too long, my eyes will get wet. She is the most caring, funniest, loving, supportive, affectionate, sexiest person I've ever known on any level. And she just surprises me every day. And she reminds me to enjoy this, to enjoy this life and enjoy what we have. And I can't say enough about her, man. She's my queen in every sense of the word, and has irrevocably altered my life in so many ways that are all positive. And I've said that if we had just had the night we met and that was it, and I, for whatever reason, we never got together or something, I still would have changed my life. Like the night I met her, if that was all we had, that would have changed my life.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
First week with Suze.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
Some childhood abuse.
What are you most excited about?
Well, I'm excited about these 2 TV projects, but if I'm being honest, I'm excited about Suzanne.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Oh man, so much. I would tell him just to not worry so much, and to trust that you'll take care of things in the moment as you need to. But don't worry. Stop worrying. Worrying is saying prayers for the worst thing to happen. Just don't worry so much. And I would tell him, your biggest job is to get your insides straightened out and to understand that until you fix what's inside your heart and your head, nothing outside you is going to make it better. And so your happiness and your emotional and mental health are your responsibility. And you need to stop worrying about bullshit. And you need to stop chasing objects outside of yourself to give you some kind of deliverance or distraction. And you need to dig deep and process some stuff and get yourself feeling good. That's your job.
This will be an interesting one. What book recommendations do you have for us or for the listeners?
I just started reading the memoirs of Chateaubriand, and those are pretty interesting, but I don't know that I could recommend them to everybody. I think a book that might have a lot of resonance these days, and that I like to recommend to people because nobody's read it these days, is Dog Soldiers by Robert Stone. It's a novel, I believe it won the National Book Award in '79 or something. That's one of my favorite novels, and I think the world it depicts has a lot of parallels and resonances with our current times.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
No, I think it's been great to talk to you guys, and I'm really honored and touched that you had me on your show. And getting back to the theme of silence, I think sometimes just a moment of silence is what needs to be said.
Nic, before we let you go, this is how we got a hold of you, obviously. At the end of every episode, I ask the guests, now that you kind of know us and know kind of the theme of the podcast, who are a couple of people that you know personally that you think we should try to get on the podcast next?
Well, as far as like the friends I know, like, I know McConaughey is a great hang and someone you could really dig in with. So I would suggest him. I'd probably throw my friend, the writer Walter Kern, in there. I think you guys, he's a fascinating interview. So shoot for those two.
Awesome ones.
Yeah.
Two great ones. My dad said, I read it. He was talking about the book you recommended.
Oh, you read Dog Soldiers? So good.
I'll have to read it.
Yeah. They made a movie about it that's okay, but Nick Nolte plays the character I love, and he's perfect. It's called Who'll Stop the Rain.
Nick, your writing is remarkable. I know you got into fiction writing inspired by shows like The Sopranos and Deadwood. Well, I'm here to tell you, you're now inspiring the future generations of writers. I really appreciate your time today and wish you nothing but the best. I hope God continues to bless you and your family, and I hope we get a lot more of your work to enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tim. I really appreciate that, and it's been wonderful to talk to you. Find you very impressive. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. It was awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Today's episode is brought to you by the ALS Investment Fund, a specialized biotech venture capital investment firm focused on neurodegenerative diseases, particularly ALS. They manage a large and diversified worldwide portfolio of ALS-related companies, collaborating with a global network of scientists, clinicians, foundations, and patient advocates to accelerate therapeutic development, investing for a world without ALS. Discover more about their mission and impact at alsinvestmentfund.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider supporting the podcast for free by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform, leaving a review, and sharing it with your friends. Your support means the world to us. This episode of Nothing Left Unsaid is brought to you by 11 Labs. Their groundbreaking technology makes a huge difference, and we're grateful for their support. To learn more, visit 11labs.io. A substantial portion of our sponsorship proceeds go to tackleals.com, funding cutting-edge ALS research. If you'd like to join the fight and contribute, visit tackleals.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Nothing Left Unsaid.